As I'm sure you know, Perikoftes and Lamed talked about Musar and beating up on yourself like the Alter Rebbe knows how. Adar, Rosham, Shukit, Nesul, Manuvel, Kikol Hashemesh, Shekinu Lechachamenim, Zachenu Levracha Beyemes, Ad Mosai Tast, right? Al Kedushas Nefesh Alikis. You're giving yourself Musar. The whole Chassidus is about Simcha, as we discussed in the Prakim before. Chavav Chazayin Chavches. All of a sudden, in the Tanya, Sefer of Chassidus, Mitamo, we get this unbelievable priority of Morosh Cheda and Atzvos. And how does it happen all of a sudden in the middle of the Tanya so much Morosh Cheda and Atzvos? So today's Shir explains it on two levels. Peidik Lamadal, Vehine, Af Im, even if, Kishyaydech Harbe, a person will elaborate at length. To elaborate on these ideas of Musar, an hour or two, but to be in a lowly spirit and a broken heart. And as a result, come to a great depression, and depression is the source of all evil, and it's the antithesis of everything that Chassidus stands for. Says the Rebbe Layachash, you shouldn't hesitate, you shouldn't worry about it. Which is a lack of energy, not an alternative energy, it's a lack of energy. Is klipas nega, has nothing to do with kedusha. On the side of holiness it is written, might and gladness is in his place. The Shechina does not rest only when there is joy. And the Gemara learns that you have to have joy for Dvar Halacha, you have to have joy for Tefillah, you have to have joy for mitzvahs, like the Gemara in Masechet Shabbos that the Maimorim bring, that you have to have joy. Anything Jewish requires joy, and here you're giving yourself atzvos. Ella, the answer is as follows. Since, in this case, you're depressed about the Ruchnius, you're beating yourself up, you're putting yourself into a depressed state from Ruchnius things, it's still klipas nega, but it's the teif sheba nega. It's the good in klipas nega. Which is why the Arizal writes, even worrying about Averis, it shouldn't be. In time that you're doing confession, not when you're davening or learning. They must be with joy. In other words, the Arizal himself supports the problem with atzvos. A person is depressed, even depressed from Averis. The fact of the matter is that depression from Averis is klipa. But then it's the good of klipa, teif shebenega. That's why Yiddishkeit has to be done b'simcha v'tuv le'vav. The Alter Rebbe said it in Tanya Sof Perek Chavav also, that b'shas ha'tefillah you have to be b'simcha atzuma, and b'shas ha'teir you have to be b'simcha atzuma. There's only when you're doing vidya in a special time you're allowed to do tshuva. Says the Alter Rebbe Afa Bekei, nevertheless, even though atzvos is klipa, harikachi I made that this is the way it is. La'achafya l'sitra achara, to bend klipa b'minah v'dugmas. As they say in English, you have to fight fire with fire. The way you defeat the heaviness and the lethargy and the sluggishness and the spiritual and psychological congestedness of klipa is b'minah v'dugmasa. You fight the sadness of Elam Hazeh with sadness of Avodas Hashem. The Gemara says, Minei ubei ovei, or Abba. From it itself I will come, lishde beinarga, to throw upon it a hammer, upagabay, and chop it down, kiyetzebei, with something that comes from it. You take a piece of wood from the forest, you put it into the hammer, the hatchet, and you use a piece of tree to chop down a tree. You use depression to defeat the depression. And regarding this it is written, and we had it in Tanya Perek Chavav, every depression has an advantage after it. And what is the advantage? That after you're depressed you're going to be b'simcha. As we're going to be discussing on page Mem, the rest of this Perek. And the emes is that we already had it in Sof Perek Chav Tes on page 74, where the Alter Rebbe also says that after the depression you come to a clarity of Riyas Elokus B'muchash, which is Gili Elokus. So what's the point? The point is depression is a bad thing. Depression is not a good thing. And the person is not allowed to be depressed. Depression is klipa. Sometimes you have no choice. Simcha doesn't work. The various eitzes don't work. Begging rachamim don't work because the timtum is so dense and so intense. So with a lack of options and possibilities, you give yourself musar, and the musar is no good. But yihi yemaiser, after the musar will come the simcha achara otzev, the joy which follows the depression. That's issue number one. So, this is negative, it's a necessary evil. It's like chemotherapy, like radiation. It's poison and it saves the person. It's depression, which is the worst thing in the world that a person needs to knock himself out of his state of lifelessness and lethargy and to reinvigorate himself, and therefore you should do it. But the truth of the matter is that there's another issue. And that is that ein liv nishbar miras hanefesh. The brokenheartedness and the bitterness of the spirit that we are currently discussing, for the fact that a person is far away from the light of Hashem. And one's manifestation in Klippa, as I already told you this maybe 10 times, on page 71, the Alter Rebbe says, Vasiva, he gazas a Klippa, every depression is Klippa. So you should know that when you feel far from Hashem, and you feel like you're trapped in Klippa because you have this timtum, this lethargy and sluggishness, and you feel bad about it, and you're beating yourself up for it, you should know that it's not nikroyim b'shem atzvas klal b'lashon hakodesh. It's not called depression in Hebrew. Ki atzvas hi, what is depression? Shalibi mitumtum ke'evan, that your heart is stuffed like stone. Ve'en chayes, believe it, there's no vitality in one's heart. Aval, however, the issue that we are discussing in Tanya is not called atzvas, it's called meridos v'leiv nishbar. It's bitterness and a broken heart. I like to call it anger. What's the difference between an angry person and a depressed person? A depressed person sits on a couch. An angry person gets up and goes and kills. The Nefesh HaBahamas. This depression that a person is bringing upon himself as a means of overcoming the heaviness and the lethargy of the timtum, the frozenness of the timtum. So first of all, even if it is atzmos, it's still permitted. Kachi amida. Second of all, it's meridos. Says the Rebbe. Avol meriki atzvus he. What is depression? Shali be mitumtum gavin his heart is stuffed like stone. Vein chayes believe there's no vitality in his heart. Avol maliyas v'leiv nishbar, as opposed to bitterness and a broken heart. Adar, but to the contrary, harayesh chayes believe there is life in the heart. Le'spol to react, ule'smarmir and to be bitter from the depression, from the avedas and from the timtum. Raket is only shehi chayes mebechinas gevuras kadeshes. Meridas comes from gevura, but it's holy gevuras. Ve'asimcha joy is mebechinas chasadim comes from chesed of kedusha. And ki alav kol b'shteim, the heart has chesed and gevura. So the chesed of the nefesh alakis is simcha in avodas Hashem. The gevura nefesh alakis is meridas. So first of all, even atzvus would be justified. Second of all, we're not dealing with atzvus, we're dealing with meridas. So the answer is, how could a person depress himself? A guy's depressed, a guy's down. He's stuck in a state of timtum, he can't get out of it. You tell him, what's the solution? Be more depressed. So first of all, the answer is kachi amida. You fight fire with fire. Second of all, we're not talking about that, we're talking about meridos. Meridos is gevuras kadeshes. Says the Rebbe, normally a Jew has to be besimcha, but le'itim, sometimes, the person must evoke holy strength to sweeten the judgment, which is the animal soul of the Yetzer Hara. That when a person finds that the Yetzer Hara is getting to him and he can't overcome it just with simcha and optimism, in that case you have to have bitterness. To truly sweeten judgment, it's Ela B'Shosh, you have to have Vudas itself. What the Gemara says, a person should always anger the Yetzer Hara. In other words, even though Chassidus speaks about simcha, the Gemara says li'olam. You should get your neshama angry at your nefesh habamas all the time. It says that li'olam doesn't mean li'olam. V'hainu, what's attached to li'olam? Li'olam loshen helem. B'chalei tzarei b'nafshi shetzarach lekach. When you see the depression coming on anyway, and you're trapped in the negative feelings, then you use, instead of serving Hashem with simcha, you use gevuras kadeshes of meridos. The specific time, which is the time which is designated and fit for this, for the bitterness of Avodas Hashem, for the anger of Avodas Hashem. Even the other for most people, he b'shaz at a time when the person is depressed anyway, mimila di alma from Gashmi things, or you're depressed b'lishum siba, top of the next page, any cause whatsoever. So then, this is the time to transform the depression The yes be mother the chushban now to do the cheshbainas we made in Perek Chavtes. Lakaya Maimon is out to satisfy this Gemara la'olam yargi is a chuli kanal that a person should anger Yosef and Nefesh Hara. Ubazen, as a result of this, using the depression in Avodas Hashem, yipater me'atzvah shemimila the yal must stop. You'll be rid of the depression from matters of Gashmis in this world. So what are we saying? That as a last resort, when a person has no bereda, he beats up on himself. First of all, even if it's atzvos, it's permitted, because that's the way it is. And specifically, we're talking about meridus. And he says several things. He says, if you have to, you got to do it. Number two, the Gemara says, b'shashu tzara, he says, you need it, you have to do it. And number three, the time, that's the right time to do it, is when you're depressed anyway. And I want you to know that there's a Maimon from the Rebbe from 19 years ago, from 21 years ago, Margile Bepuma the Rav Tafrishin Memvov. A few days before Yitas Kislev, the Maimon is published. I'm sure you know about it, and you have to learn it, where the Rebbe says that we no longer do this at all. Even the terms that the Alter Rebbe gives for Meridus and Atzvos. You know, b'shashu tzarech lekach, when a person is depressed, b'lava ha'chemil di alma, the Rebbe says only simcha. And the Rebbe told Rashag once asked the Rebbe, where did the Rebbe take his source for his singular focus on simcha? The Rebbe said, it's my own idea. It's a heirah for our generation, that we have to have simcha exclusively, and the Rebbe basically X's out of Tanya. Perek Chavtes and Perek Lamed, the beginning of Perek Lamed Aleph. It's a radical thing, but the Rebbe could take that achrayas. He says, after the Holocaust, we've all done the lower tshuva more than adequately, and now we have to have only simcha. The Rebbe says, Trachgut b'zayin good, the Rebbe says. The Rebbe says, you could overcome your depression with thinking good, thinking that Hashem forgives you and He'll forgive you. That's what the Rebbe says in the Maimon. Trachgut, you're depressed. Think that you'll go out of your depression. Think that the Eibishter forgives you, the Rebbe says. Think that the Eibishter forgives you. The Rebbe says, if in Gashmias, Trachgut b'zayin good works, in Ruchnis it for sure works. Because the Ruchnis is easier to change than Gashmi. You shouldn't take Avodah Morosh Chayda. Avodah, yeah, but Simcha. B'tach and optimism, not depression and sadness. Avodah, of course. But the positive avodah, not a negative avodah.